Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the CompTIA A Plus course. This is Module 1, which is supporting operating systems. If your brand's thinking new to A Plus, you might not know this already, but the A Plus course actually consists of 18 modules. This is only Module 1. That's a lot, right? If you're new to my channel, hi, I'm Warren. I'm going to be your trainer for this specific course. And in this module, we're going to be taking a look at identifying competent operating systems, troubleshooting methodology, using Windows features and tools, managing files in Windows, managing disks in Windows, and lastly, managing devices in Windows. That's obviously not the only thing this module is going to be about. This module is going to be quite lengthy. I'm not going to lie about it. So you might want to use the timestamps in the description down below if you're looking for a specific topic. But this should give you an idea of the main topics we're going to be looking at. So on to our first topic in this module, which is what is an operating system? Well, guys, an operating system is basically a software package that enables a PC to function by performing tasks such as recognizing keyboard input, sending output to a monitor, and controlling peripherals. Obviously, it's much more than that. It's not just keyboard input. You obviously have a mouse that's going to be giving input. You might have potentially a webcam. Output wise, could also maybe be some speakers. You could potentially have a printer hooked up. So the operating system in a nutshell is going to allow you to communicate with your hardware. You can think of it as a middleman or a translator. Something else the operating system also does is it enables hardware, software, and users to communicate with one another. By default, your computer's hardware, like your motherboard, your CPU, your RAM, hard drives, all of that, that is unable to communicate with your software on your PC. So you kind of need something in between, a middleman, if you will. And that's where your operating system comes into play. Now, your operating system handles basic system functions such as hardware interfaces and also input and output, which we've mentioned. That can actually be many things, especially these days if you can look at the amount of technology we've got available. Now, your operating system consists of core files such as the kernel, device drivers, and programs. Majority of these things are things we're going to be looking at more in depth later on during this course, especially things like device drivers and programs. Your operating system can be either command line based or it can be GUI. GUI standing for graphical user interface. That's what it stands for. Something else to keep in mind with regards to your operating system is desktop styles. They're a pretty big part when it comes to your customers. Customers tend to go for something that looks nice and it looks pretty, something that's generally very user friendly. So if something doesn't look nice, the average user or end user is not going to go and use it or buy it for that matter, or they're not going to want to go and use it for that matter. So when it comes to choosing an operating system like Windows, your Linux, maybe Apple, or when it comes to choosing a specific version of Windows, let's say Windows 10, Windows 7, the way it looks and the way it feels is going to play a big part in whether people are actually going to choose it or not. There's also the fact of versions. So if I decide to go for Windows 10, what version of Windows 10 do I want to go and use? So obviously different versions have got different cosmetics available and different settings available. Alright guys, let's take a bit of a look at Microsoft Windows in general. So CompTIA says Microsoft Windows is a GUI based operating system. And for the most part, I believe that's probably true, at least since Windows 95 came out, that has been the case. The chances of you running into something older than Windows 95 is very unlikely. I highly doubt you guys are ever going to see Windows 95 or Windows 98 or any of those operating systems, quite frankly. So the oldest operating systems you'll see at this point in time is probably going to be something like Windows 7. Anything older than that, very unlikely. So GUI, which stands for Graphical User Interface, gives you a nice little interface that you can go and click on, that you can go and navigate. You've got nice little icons and pictures and all that. That's basically what it stands for. So all Windows operating systems at this point in time are GUI. Then we also have shell. So this is an operating system component that interacts directly with users and functions as the command interpreter for operating systems. Now, something that you guys most likely know already is currently Microsoft Windows is the dominant operating system for most commercial PCs. And this applies to pretty much all countries in the world, even the United States of America. Now, granted, there are quite a few big other players in the market like Apple. So if you go look at the USA, Apple is also pretty big there. But if I'm not wrong, I think Windows might still be the bigger one of the two in the United States. For the rest of the world, unlike the United States, Windows is pretty much the only operating system. And then here and there, you might see Apple and some of the other parties, Something that you guys probably have noticed by now already as well is different versions provide different features or user interface elements. So depending on what version of Windows you're running, you'll obviously get different benefits, different goodies and toys. You'll be able to go and modify your Windows to look a certain way, but it all depends on what version of Windows you're obviously running. Interface components for general use, technical configuration, and troubleshooting. These are the three kinds of interface components you can expect. So some of them are just for general use, just for your everyday use. Then there's some interface components for technical configuration that you can only find on some of the more expensive versions of Windows. It's one of those classic cases in life that you get what you pay for. The more you pay, the more you get. So if you pay more, you're going to get more toys to go and play with, some of which allow you to go and do some technical configuration and even troubleshooting on your Windows operating system. Something that most people know already as well, but don't shoot the messenger, this actually is part of the course, believe it or not, is the desktop is the top level of the interface. And when I say the word desktop, I'm not talking about your physical box, not your physical PC. We're talking about the actual desktop on your computer, the one where you will find your little shortcut icons for your programs and your games and all of that. That desktop is the one I'm talking about. So that is the top level of the interface. It can contain icons for opening apps and data, like we just said. It can also contain app launch and control tools. Something that you may also see, but this depends on the operating system obviously, is the start menu and start screen, and also the taskbar at the bottom. And what I've seen, the taskbar is on all versions of Windows. Start button, not start menu, but the start button, well, that part depends on the operating system. As you guys probably have seen already, Windows 8 has no start button. And then they eventually brought it back on Windows 8.1. Thank God for that. And then on Windows 10, it looks very much the same as Windows 7, which most people are familiar with. The good news is on Windows 11, which is coming out, the start button is still there. It's not on the bottom left, at least not by default. You do have the ability to go and drag the start button to the bottom left. Now, it's worth noting that Windows 11 is not part of this course, guys. This course was obviously made a few years ago by CompTIA, and I'm going to cover it strictly according to what CompTIA has included in this course, because that is what they will ask you guys in the exam. So even though Windows 11 is coming out at this point in time, it's not going to be in this course, and it's not going to be in the exam. So it's not something you guys need to worry about. If and when the new version of CompTIA's A+ comes out, then you need to be concerned about Windows 11, because they're most likely going to go and include Windows 11 in that version of the course. So with regards to the start button, it's generally in the bottom, in the middle of your taskbar in Windows 11, just food for thought, and you can actually drag it around on the taskbar where you want it to be. So that's just a little extra I want to throw in there for you guys. Alright guys, and then let's have a little peek at the different versions of Windows we get. So when it comes to versions of Windows, the first one up is Windows 10. So like we said, we're not going to discuss Windows 11 in this course. It's not part of this course, and it's not something you need to worry about for the exam. Not at all. So with regards to Windows 10, as we know already, this is probably the most commonly used operating system today as we stand right now. There's a bit of a picture for you guys so you can see what it looks like. So what do we know about Windows 10? It is the current version that we're all using. It combines both legacy and touch-enabled controls. So if you go click at a little icon way at the bottom right of the screen, that's going to open what we call the Action Center, something that might probably still be covered in this course. And in the Action Center, you have the ability to go and choose tablet mode or desktop mode. So at the moment, what we see in that picture is desktop mode. So that start menu, you can see this individual went and opened the start menu, and that start menu is currently not populating the whole screen. It's not filling up your whole screen. It looks very much the same as Windows 7. Now, if you were to have gone and chosen tablet mode, that little start menu is actually going to fill up your whole screen. It's going to look like the old Windows 8 for anyone that's ever seen Windows 8. All of those tiles in your start menu, it will fill up your whole screen like Windows 8. And the reason they've got that is because Windows 10 is very commonly used by platforms that need touchscreens. So you might go into a restaurant of some kind and your waiter might very well ask you, okay, what table were you sitting at? And they're going to go beep bop boop on a screen, and you'll find that that screen is very commonly a touch screen. That's just an example. Obviously, it's not limited to just that. Something else that stands out quite a lot on Windows 10, which we're all very happy about, is the Start button, which we've mentioned a few times. So a lot of people were very upset when that was removed when Windows 8 came out. Thank God for all of us, they brought that back. Then you also have what they call feature updates and quality updates. So those are qualities that comes with Windows 10. Alright guys, and then some other competitors we have in the lineup is Windows 10 Mobile. So this puppy consists of a user interface and code base for all devices. It ships on Windows 10 mobile smartphones and Surface tablets. I see a bit of a spelling mistake there, so please forgive me for that one. So yeah, personally, I don't really see Windows being installed on mobile devices that often. It is something people use and some companies use, but it's not something you see often. So generally when I see companies using Windows devices, it's because they want to enforce group policies on those devices. Group policies is something that only works on Windows devices. It does not work on Android or Apple. So that's a Windows thing. Then we also have Windows 8 and 8.1. So first version to support touchscreens. So that's basically when Microsoft wanted to join the market when it comes to touchscreens. So at that point in time, everybody started using tablets and phones. And like you can expect, Microsoft probably wanted a piece of the action. So they decided, you know what, boys, we need to get in on this. So let's develop an operating system that supports touchscreens, which is why Windows 8 was not so nice on a desktop or a laptop. It's because it was actually designed for a tablet or a phone. If you think about it, go open Windows 8 or 8.1 if you have one. And if you go look at all those tiles and all that, very inconvenient when it comes to a desktop or a laptop, but on a phone or a tablet, yeah, it's actually not too shabby. Then it's actually not that bad. Also, you have the start screen, which fills up the whole screen. That was very annoying on Windows 8 and 8.1. And then lastly, you had the little charms bar that you can actually see on the screen on the right there. So in that little picture way on the right, that little gray menu that's opening on the side, that is the charms bar, guys. And then let's look at the next one on the list, which is, you've guessed it, Windows 7. Now, this was one of my personal favorite operating systems. And back when it was out and when it was the only operating system, that was probably the top dog in its day. And you don't really realize what functions it did not have until you start using Windows 10, and then one day you randomly go back to Windows 7 and you look for a certain function. Only then do you realize that, oops, it actually does not have this function, it does not have that function. It becomes a bit of a pickle. Now, with regards to Windows 7, I think one of the things that stands out probably the most here is that famous little start menu interface. That's one of the things people complained about the most when Windows 8 came out. Then some other operating systems that CompTIA considers legacy is Windows Vista or Vista, depending on how you want to pronounce that, and then also Windows XP. Now, for those of you that don't know what the word legacy means, that simply means something is old. So if something is a piece of old hardware or a piece of old software, that will be considered legacy. So whenever something is no longer in use. So at this point in time, Windows 10 is just Windows 10. But there's going to be a point in time when Windows 10 will be considered a legacy operating system, an old operating system. So that might be in about 3 or 5 years from now, 10 to 1. So that's what the word legacy means. So at the time of when CompTIA made this course or released this course, Windows 7 was not considered legacy yet. Only Vista or Vista and XP was considered legacy. Now, currently, as things stand in 2021, Windows 7 actually technically is a legacy operating system, but not when it comes to the course and not within the exam itself. So just keep that in mind, guys. Alright guys, so let's take a bit of a look at the different Windows editions you get when it comes to Windows. Now, one of the first things you'll probably notice on my little list here is I've also included Windows 7 editions and Windows 8 editions besides Windows 10. Now, yes, I've mentioned earlier that Windows 10 is the current version we're using, but this course does officially include Windows 7 and 8, which is why I'm including it. And if it's included in the course, you can be assured that it's probably going to be in the exam. So for that reason, I've included it for your convenience so that you at least know about it. So there is the different versions you get with regards to Windows 7 and also with Windows 8. Now, honestly, you're probably going to only be using Windows 10 realistically in a company environment, and it's probably going to be Windows 10 Professional or Pro or the Windows 10 Enterprise. The education version that's normally something you'll find in a college, a university, a school. The name education kind of says it all. Home is something you'll get, you've guessed it, at home. So that's obviously a very cheap operating system, and like we've said earlier, you get what you pay for. So the more you pay, the more you get. So if you're going to go buy yourself the more expensive versions like a Pro or an Enterprise version, you're going to get many extra benefits, some of which we'll mention in a bit. So if we go look at Windows in the corporate world, that basically comes down to running Windows in the work environment, 10 to 1 on premises in an office environment. Although nowadays, with COVID-19 and just in general of people working from home so much, it might not be a matter of people working physically at the office anymore, but it still comes down to the work environment. So with Windows 10 in the corporate world, you'll notice they mention domain network, a group of computers which share a common account database referred to as a directory. Now, pretty much any PC in a work environment is normally joined to what they refer to as a domain, which means you can pretty much go and sit down at any PC at your office and you can just go and type in your little username, you can go type in your password, and it's going to go and contact a central point of authentication. And it's going to basically just check out if you are indeed who you say you are and if you are indeed the owner of that said account or that said device. That's what a domain network is. Now, by default, when you install an operating system on a computer, let's say Windows 10, that operating system is on what we refer to as a work group. So if you log on to that machine, it's going to check locally on that machine if you are indeed the owner of that machine or that account. It checks this normally in what they refer to as the SAM, S-A-M. It's a very small, tiny little database on that computer that includes all the local accounts on that machine. And as soon as you go and join that machine to your company's domain, then your machine will no longer check locally if you're the owner of that account or that device. It's going to go and contact a central database which contains all the accounts for your organization. It's going to go and check, are you indeed a member or an employee of this organization, and does that account or that PC indeed belong to you? Now, to be able to join the domain, you shouldn't just have Windows 10, you need to have the right version of Windows 10. This is generally only available on, let's say, Windows 10 Enterprise. If you're lucky, maybe Windows 10 Pro. If you go look at the cheaper versions, they do not provide you that ability. So if you are going to go and use Windows 10 Home, you are not going to have the ability to go and join a domain. Because what domain are you going to be joining if you're at home? There is no domain to join at home. Now, they've given us a few other abilities here. They mentioned the ability to join a domain. That one we know already. BitLocker. That is encryption. It allows you to go and encrypt an actual hard drive, encrypt your whole computer, encrypt an external hard drive or a flash drive. Now, to be able to use BitLocker, not only should you have Windows 10, but once again you need to have Windows 10 Enterprise, for example. If you're going to have the cheaper versions, they do not come with that encryption. EFS stands for Encryption File System, and that's something that normally comes with the NTFS file system. Something we also like to go and use in the work environment. So BitLocker is used to go and encrypt a whole drive, like a whole hard drive or a whole flash drive, where EFS is more used for a single file or a single folder on a PC. Not something I see companies use a lot because normally a PC is only used by one specific individual. So if you are using a PC that's shared amongst other employees, let's say you're taking shifts. This is maybe a PC that's used 24/7 and there's 2 or 3 people using that same station and they're taking shifts. Then you might potentially have something on that machine that you don't want other people to see. Something confidential. It could be like your payslip. So if you don't want other people on that PC to see it, you can go and use EFS to encrypt that folder so that only you can see it. But because people only use one machine, generally we don't need to go and use EFS, we only use BitLocker. Then you also have what they refer to as branch cache. And whenever you see the word cache, whether we're talking about branch cache, browser cache, CPU cache, you can pretty much be rest assured that there's going to be some form of temporary memory. And in most cases, these forms of temporary memory, they do more than one thing, but they generally make things faster. So branch cache, something we'll look into deeper a little bit later on, is used to make things smoother and faster. So if someone accesses a certain resource on a server, which is somewhere else, Maybe you are at a branch office and you're trying to access a resource at head office. If you're trying to access that resource, it's probably going to go and load it for you the first time. So that's going to probably take a while. But the next time you or someone else at your company tries to load that same resource or access that same resource, it's probably going to end up loading it a lot quicker because it stores all of that or most of that in your branch's cache. So it's just to give you and your fellow colleagues at your branch a faster, smoother experience. It's the very same thing as when you go and use your browser. If you go use your web browser to go and browse a certain web page, if you're loading it for the first time, it's going to be a bit slow, but laggy because it's loading everything for the first time. The second time you go back to that same web page, it's going to load a lot faster because all of that or most of that website has been stored in your browser cache. So it doesn't have to load all of it from scratch. It just loads what has changed. Same can be said about branch cache. And let's go have a look at our next topic, which is 32-bit and 64-bit. Now in the A plus course we still talk about this, but realistically in real life, majority of people are only using 64-bit. If you go look at some of the newer operating systems that's being released at the moment, they only are available in 64-bit, especially the server side of things. Now 32-bit, that's the old architecture we had available for our CPUs and all that, and for our programs. 64-bit, that's the newer version. Now if you go back about, let's say 10 years in time, back then pretty much everybody's PC was a 32-bit operating system, and pretty much all the applications you were running on that operating system was also 32-bit. If you tried to run a 64-bit application on a 32-bit operating system, it would not work. You would have to go and install a second operating system, or you would have to go and format your PC and format it as a 64-bit operating system for you to be able to run an application. Something else that we had to keep in mind back then is not all CPUs supported 64-bit operating systems back then. You had to go and make sure you buy yourself a CPU and a motherboard that actually supports a 64-bit operating system. If your CPU didn't support it, well, yeah, you would have been in a pickle. Nowadays, pretty much everybody is running 64-bit. So if you find someone that's running a 32-bit operating system, that is very unusual. It's very weird. So somewhere between, let's say, 10 years ago and now, there was a transitioning phase where people were either on 32-bit and 64-bit. It was like a 50-50 situation. And now we've reached a point in time where everybody is running 64-bit. Now they mention all versions and editions are available as 32-bit and 64-bit. I don't fully agree with that. It depends on the Windows. If you look at the latest versions of Windows, they are in fact only available on 64-bit. 64-bit Windows can usually run 32-bit apps. Usually yes, so that's backwards compatible is what we say. 32-bit Windows cannot run 64-bit apps. So that's the issue we were facing back then. So if you're running a 32-bit operating system and you wanted to run the newer versions, nope, wouldn't work. 64-bit Windows requires a 64-bit device drivers to be signed by Microsoft. And not to mention the CPU I spoke of others. So never mind the drivers. If you don't have the hardware that supports it, it will not work. So if no 64-bit driver is available, the hardware can't be used on a 64-bit Windows installation. Now something I'm going to mention, and only mention at this point in time, but we are going to cover it in more depth later on this course. If you want to go and upgrade your Windows, you have to stay within the same architecture. So if you are hypothetically speaking running Windows 7 and you would like to upgrade yourself to Windows 10, you need to stay in the same architecture. So if I'm running Windows 7 32-bit, I can only upgrade to Windows 10 32-bit. If I'm running Windows 7 64-bit, you can only upgrade to Windows 10 64-bit. If you wanted to switch architectures, you would have to do what they refer to as a clean installation. You're going to have to wipe your PC and install a clean copy of Windows. In other words, you're going to have to go and manually back up all your data, which is a very tedious process. So yeah, I think we've pretty much covered Windows in a nutshell, at least for now. So let's take a look at our next operating system, which is not Windows, it is Apple. So with regards to Apple operating systems, it's available only on Apple built computers. That's a bit of a pickle, but I mean, what can you do? Very stable. I don't really like Apple, if I'm being perfectly honest, but if they say it's stable, I can't disagree with that. I've seen nothing but good results from it. It is very stable. Where from Windows side, natively, it's not that stable. You'll find there's a lot of updates very frequently, And it's not always about security and critical stuff like that. Very often it's because something is unstable, which is generally why companies don't go and get the latest version of Windows whenever it gets released. So when Windows 11 gets released, you'll find a lot of companies not just going to go and jump and get Windows 11. They are going to go and wait a little bit and just check how this kite flies first and wait for Microsoft to go and patch it and fix all the bugs and the glitches. Where Apple, generally when they release something, it's stable. So that you got to give it to Apple for that. Less extra hardware available. Yeah, that's a bit of unfortunate issue with regards to Apple devices. You can't always go and upgrade them the way you want. Kernel is based on Unix, and there's also update limitations. So when it comes to updating your Apple device, updating it is sometimes quite tedious, and you're gonna have to go to the support website. I've written it down there for you guys, or you're gonna have to go to an Apple store near you. So even if you're an Apple technician, you might not be able to do this. Also, currently there is no end of life that I'm aware of. I stand to be corrected there, but that is what the A Plus course officially says. So even if there is an end of life now, at the time of the making of this course, that is what CompTIA said. They said no end of life. So that's probably what they're going to ask you in the exam. Although, as far as I know, there is no questions about this particular topic in the exam that you guys need to be aware of. And then the next operating system on this list is Unix, or however you want to go and pronounce that. So Unix is a family of operating systems typically running mission critical applications and infrastructure. So where you'll find Linux and Unix is normally in companies where they're very concerned about security. So generally the thought is that whenever you're running Windows, you're bound to get hacked sooner or later. Although Windows have actually gotten pretty nifty when it comes to the security these days, they're not as bad as they used to be. But there's a lot of people, especially old folks in IT that's been around for quite some time, they still prefer to go and use Unix and Linux, or Linux, however you want to go and pronounce that. It generally is still seen as the better, safer operating system. Now, Linux, an open source operating system supported by a wide range of hardware and software vendors. So many, many moons ago, there was a guy that actually went and made an operating system and he released it for free to the public. You can imagine that Microsoft obviously didn't like that very much because they want to go and sell their operating system to the public. And if some other guy is going to come along, make an operating system and release it for free to the public, yeah, that is not good for business. Now, a little bit more technical detail about this. Unix is portable to different hardware platforms, and you also get several versions or flavors of Unix. So it's often not compatible though, and it's not always open source. So generally you want to try and get yourself an open source version. So if you're a coder or a developer, then at least you can go and tweak it. If you're not a coder or a developer, then I would say stay away from them, because what are you going to be doing with an open source version then? Linux was designed to be open source originally, like I said, and many distributions and distros of Linux. So yeah, guys, I think personally for me, the biggest issue of Unix is the fact that it's not compatible with a lot of things. It might be a very secure operating system, but the fact that it's not compatible with a lot of things, that kind of throws a spanner in the works. And it's also supposed to be an open source operating system, as you can see, or at least it originally was designed to be an open source operating system. Nowadays, you might get versions that's potentially not open source. So that poses a real problem for some people. So yeah, enough about operating systems. Let's take a look at CompTIA's troubleshooting model. Now this part you guys need to pay close attention to, because this is almost guaranteed to be in the exam. They love asking about this in the A+ exams. So this is probably going to be more in the first exam than the second exam. So this is going to be the 1001. You might get some questions about it in the 1002, but it's normally more in the 1001 where you get questions about the troubleshooting model. So let's go have a look at the troubleshooting model. The first step is identify the problem. So I'm going to spitball here and make a few things up. Let's say you have a user that calls you, emails you, WhatsApps you, whatever the case might be, and they say something along the lines of, my computer is not working. So now the first thing you need to do here is identify what the potential problem could be. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. But the biggest factor here is the user you're dealing with. If the user is somewhat tech savvy, then it's going to make your job a lot quicker and a lot easier. If that user you're dealing with is not tech savvy at all, yeah, that becomes a problem. I'm not saying they're dumb, although you do get a lot of those people. Some people legit are very smart, they just are in some other field. This might be a doctor, might be a lawyer. So they are obviously very clued up in their respective fields, just not in your field. This is your job. You're supposed to be the expert here. So let's take a look at identifying the problem. So the first thing we need to do is question the user and identify changes to the computer. So that's personally the best way to go and do. I would say ask the person, have you changed anything recently on this computer? So if they say something along the lines of, my computer does not want to start, then you might want to go and ask this person questions like, sir, ma'am, have you recently changed something on your computer? Have you installed something, uninstalled something, changed some sort of setting? Is there anything you've changed within the last hour or the last day or so that you are aware of or that you can remember? Now, sometimes they did, but they just can't remember anything like that. But more often than not, they will remember some sort of change. They might tell you, I've recently installed a new driver, or if I've recently installed this new program called Program X. Do you think that could be the issue? Well, it might be, it might not be. You also need to go and identify changes to the computer. So this is not necessarily something the user would be aware of. So this includes checking random things like Windows updates. So there might very well have been some sort of Windows update that took place on this PC recently that the user is not aware of. So you might need to go and check, in the system logs, event viewer, just go check in your Windows updates if there was any recent Windows updates that was installed on this machine. Something else you want to go and do is perform backups before implementing any changes. So whether it's going to be a small change, a big change, you do backups and then you do another backup. I suppose it might be, a little paranoia, to go and do a second backup, but I personally like to go and do a backup and then another backup just because. You can never have too many backups. So at the very least, get yourself at least one backup before you do any changes, because you never know, you might end up actually breaking something or doing more harm. Even if you are an expert, you can have 10 years, 20 years of experience in the field, and you can still make a boo-boo along the line and end up making matters worse. You cannot leave that user worse off than what they were. Can you imagine what the consequences will be? Thirdly, what you're going to be doing is ask about any possible environmental or infrastructure changes. Honestly, this is not something that you're going to find is likely. The chances are there's nothing that's actually changed in the environment or the infrastructure, but you never know. It could be that maybe this PC was recently moved. It used to be in a nice office and now it's moved into a very hot environment, a very cold, a very humid, a very dry environment. All of those are factors that can actually influence that PC. I, for example, had a client once that bought brand new laptops from me. These were brand stinking new laptops, but they were in an industrial area where they make concrete structures and all that. And little less than a week later, they started calling me about these laptops. They kept telling me that these laptops keep shutting down randomly. I thought, okay, that's strange. Maybe it's a virus, malware. And eventually, when I went to this client of mine, I asked them, where are these new laptops? They said, no, they're right in front of you. I didn't even recognize them because of the amount of dust. Now, these laptops were not even outside, they were indoors in the offices. But the amount of dust, concrete dust, and all of that in that area was just insane, to the point where all of those vents for those laptops were completely clogged. Completely. Which means these laptops are overheating, and when the average computer overheats, it shuts down automatically to protect itself from damage. So any environmental factor can have an influence. Infrastructure as well, not so often, but you never know. Another step you can go look at is review system and app logs. Many ways you can go do that, but there are a few things that's actually built into your Windows, your client operating system, and your server operating system that you can make use of, which are free. You don't have to go and install anything or download anything. So one of them is the event viewer. If you go check the event viewer on your client operating system or your server operating system, it shows you logs about just about anything. So if you go check there, it's not going to fix your problem, absolutely not, but it might point you in the right direction at least. Alright, boys and girls, so our second big point here is establish a theory of probable cause. So let me give you guys a scenario. I'm going to go back to number one, which says identify the problem. So now I've got a user, he or she calls me, they say my PC does not want to start. And now I start asking questions and I ask them, when did it start doing this? And they might say, nah, it started doing this last night ever since that lightning storm we had. Now you see where I'm going with this. There's a very good chance that the lightning might have affected this PC. It might have been a power surge, maybe a lightning strike. I don't know, it struck some sort of structure somewhere along the line, and boom, there goes the PC. It's not always the whole PC, although it's possible. It's normally the motherboard or the power supply, more often the power supply of the PC. So now my theory here is I suspect it might be a lightning strike. I suspect it might be the power supply that's blown. Doesn't mean that is the cause. I suspect that's going to be the cause. So what I'm going to go and do here is I'm going to question the obvious. I'm going to ask them, did you unplug the PC during that lightning storm? If they say no, well then you know. There's a good chance that this might be the case. I'm going to ask them silly questions like, have you tried using a different power cord? Have you tried plugging this PC into a different electrical outlet perhaps? All kinds of silly obvious questions like that, but you never know. Sometimes you'll be surprised by the answers you get. If necessary, conduct internal or external research based on symptoms. Depending on how long you've actually been in A plus or in IT, you're probably not going to go and do that. Only when you get something very weird or out of the ordinary are you actually going to go and do research, on some symptoms. That's the only time we actually do that. But if it's general stuff like the one I just gave you guys, then the chances are you're probably going to know already more or less what it is. You just need to go and confirm what it is. The third big point here is test the theory to determine cause. So I've already established that my theory is I think that user's power supply has blown. Now I simply need to go and test if my theory is correct. If my theory is not, then I start the whole procedure over, obviously. So I'm going to go and open the user's box, maybe put in a different power supply and try and start the PC. If I see the PC starts, well, then then you proceed further because then you know you were correct. If the PC does not start, then you start all over again by establishing a theory and probable cause and all that. So with regards to testing your theory to determine cause, once the theory has been confirmed, in other words, I've confirmed that it was in fact the power supply, determine the next steps to solve the problem. So I've used a test power supply, I've established that yes, it is the power supply. So my next step might be in my scenario to order this person a new power supply. So yeah, you can go and fix a power supply, but that's not recommended. It's very dangerous to go and open a power supply, and quite frankly, the labor alone is going to cost you 10 or 20 times more than what it would cost you for a new power supply. They cost next to nothing. Just get yourself a new power supply. It's quicker, it's easier, and more importantly, it's safer. So you are not an electrician, you are a computer technician. So if a power supply is blown, you throw it away, you get a new one. You tell that user to get a new one. That is the safer way, the safer course to go and take. Like I said earlier, if the theory is not confirmed, so in other words, if it turns out not to be that power supply, well, yeah, you re-establish a new theory of what you might think it might be. So maybe then I'll say, you know what, I think it might be the motherboard. If it's not the power supply, I think it might be the motherboard. And then you just start the whole procedure all over again. And then point 4, boys and girls, establish a plan of action to resolve the problem and implement a solution. So assuming you have found what the problem is, in my case it was the power supply, what am I going to do? Well, my plan of action is to get this employee, this user, this client of mine, I'm going to get them to get a new power supply. So I can either tell him or her, buy yourself a new one, it depends on the situation, or I can tell them, you know what, I want to order a new one and I want to put it in for you. Can I proceed? And if they say yes and they give you the green light, that is your plan of action. So then you just arrange to have the new one installed for them. And then step 5, verify full system functionality. Now, you're pretty much going to be guaranteed that the system is going to work, but it's still a very good idea to always go and test it. You never know. Sometimes you might think everything works and then something is actually misbehaving in the background. Very unlikely, but you never know. It's also just to put the user at ease and also just to prove to them that you did in fact fix the whole computer, because you get weird people out there. Sometimes you will legit fix a computer or a laptop or a device, and then afterwards, 5 days later, 10 days later, or even 5 hours later, they will go and break it again in some sort of way, and they will go and blame it on you and say, no, you did not fix that machine properly. Do not trust any user. Doesn't matter if they seem friendly, they will turn on you in a moment's notice. So you're going to go and verify the full system functionality just to make sure you did your work properly. Even if you are an expert, it can't hurt to double check. And if possible, I would say do this in front of the user just to show them, look, sir, it has been fixed. You see now. And then step 6, document findings, actions, and outcomes. Now, you'll be surprised that most technicians in real life don't actually do this, but this will actually help you going forward. It's not always going to help you, but there's been many times in my life where I can honestly say this has actually helped me out of a real jam. So whether you fixed the machine or whether you did not fix the machine, document your findings. So I'm going to go and document that I had a user who said their PC didn't want to start. I'm going to document all the steps I took, what I thought it was, and what it ended up actually being in the end of the day, and what I had to go and do to solve the problem. Now, why you want to go and do that is later on, if you need to go and do research, if someone else needs to do research, they can use your findings. And quite often you might find that when you have a certain problem in IT, it sometimes takes you hours, days even to solve that problem. And now you never get that problem, and then eventually one day, suddenly after 6 months, you get that same problem again, and now you cannot remember what you did. That's a very frustrating feeling, is when you know you've had a problem before in your life, you know you fixed that problem, but you cannot remember what you did or what the problem was. That's very frustrating, and that has happened to me quite a few times in my life. So if you have your previous findings documented, you can just go and search for them, and you'll find it, and you'll see, oh, you know what, guys, this is what the problem actually was in the end of the day, and this is what I actually did in the end of the day to fix that problem. So instead of it taking you another 5 days like it did previously, it might very well take you less than an hour to solve that problem. So let's take a little bit of a look at customer communication and skills. So with regards to customer service and communication skills, soft skills can be as important as technical skills. So what they mean by soft skills is that is do you have empathy, for example? Can you relate to the user? So when a user seems like they're a complete idiot in some cases, forgive the term, but it's going to feel like that at sometimes. There's going to be times you're going to feel like you want to kill the user, you want to slash their tires, you want to murder them in their sleep. You cannot do that. So you need to be professional and say, I apologize, sir. What seems to be the problem? Kind of like a waiter. I think a waiter and a waitress is a very good example. They have very, very good communication skills when it comes to very difficult customers and very difficult users. So that is why in IT, we generally like to go and hire someone that used to be a waitress or a waiter, because we know you've got good experience when it comes to dealing with difficult people. And in IT, you are damn well going to be dealing with a lot of difficult people. And you cannot go and say anything mean to them. You cannot do anything mean. You need to be polite and professional at all times. And that's going to be very, very difficult at some times. So here you've got two question types you can go and ask the user: open-ended questions and close-ended questions. So it depends on the situation, I suppose. So if you want the user to explain in their own words, not just in one word, but in their own words, what a problem could possibly be, you need to ask them an open-ended question. So that would be something like, can you please explain to me when more or less this happened? Or how, in your opinion, would you say blah, blah, blah? So that is an open-ended question. Closed-ended questions is when you're forcing the user or the client to give you only a one-worded answer, such as a yes or a no. So, did you turn off the PC last night? Yes or no? If they say no, then I know. As easy as that. Then we've got develop a troubleshooting mindset. Now, this sounds easier than it actually is. Trust me. They say be calm. Now you might think to yourself, oh, that sounds easy. Yeah, it's not. There's going to be times where these users are going to push you to your limits. You might start laughing at this point in time, but I'm telling you now, you're going to get some very weird people out there. They will push you to your limits to the point where you are going to want to go and murder them in their sleep. So you need to stay calm. If it feels like it's getting out of hand, I would say maybe just step away for a few moments and come back. Tell them you want to go to the restroom. Go to the restroom, breathe in deep, come back, and just start over. They also mentioned take regular breaks. That's got nothing to do with the user itself. It's just sometimes the problem is very easy, it's very simple, and you're overthinking it. It might very well be a matter of less is more, especially when you've got a lot of experience in IT. So you might be overthinking it. Meanwhile, it's actually a very easy, very simple solution. And sometimes when you take a moment away from the problem, you just go, have a coffee, go get yourself a nice cool drink, and you come back after 5 minutes, you might actually very well see the problem. Challenge assumptions. That's something you need to go and look. And assess costs and impact. That might be, I think, another good example for that might be that power supply I was talking about earlier. So we could have gone and said, you know what, let's try and fix the power supply. But that is very dangerous, number one, very time consuming, number two, and very expensive, number three. So that's a matter of assessing the costs and the impact. So I'm going to say, you know what, instead of wasting all that time, that effort, and that money, and putting our lives at risk here, why not just go and buy ourselves a new one? It's going to be quick, cheap, and safe. Last one here is know when to escalate an issue. So if you find that this problem is above your pay grade, then you might need to go and escalate it to a more senior IT person. There's always someone that knows more than you. So then you might know, you know what, let's just go and escalate this. Know your limits. There's no shame in that. All right, then guys, let's take a bit of a look at Windows settings and control panel. Now, currently, as things stand, we still have access to the control panel, but believe it or not, Microsoft is actually in the process of phasing out the control panel. Now, they've been doing this for many, many moons. For a very long time now, Microsoft has been saying they're going to remove control panel. And, if I'm being honest here, I was actually a bit concerned in the beginning because Microsoft does have a reputation for just randomly removing something without giving a moment's notice. Sometimes you're lucky. They might give a notice. They might say, you know what, guys, next month we're gonna stop support for blah blah blah. Please be aware. So sometimes you're lucky, but they're very well known to just not announce something and just do something. Now, luckily for us, control panel is not being phased out in one simple go. It's a gradual process. It's a transitioning phase. So ever so often, when you get these new Windows updates that you get from time to time, you'll notice that something is now missing on control panel and it has been added to the new control panel, which they refer to as the settings app. We'll show you guys the new control panel in just a moment. So there's a new control panel alongside the old control panel on your PC. The new one is called the settings app. So all the new goodies and all the new functions that come specifically with Windows 10, you'll find that almost all of them are only available on the new control panel. All the old settings that you're used to from Windows 7's days and Windows 8's days, those ones are still on the control panel, but they are gradually being phased out and moved or migrated to the new settings app. So it's a gradual process is what they're doing. So just be aware that it's going to be removed. Funny enough, currently as things stand, I still see the control panel on Windows 11, although Windows 11 has not been officially released yet. So when I made this video was obviously in August 2021. And as things stand, when I tested the trial versions of Windows, the insider previews and the leaked versions and all that, control panel is still there. But once they officially release it, which sounds like October 2021, who knows? They might have actually removed it in the official version of Windows 11. Only time will tell. So you can see here I've got a few points marked for you guys, or should I say CompTIA has marked them for you guys. CompTIA has actually marked them for you guys. The first one is task groups. So if you look at point 1 there, where number 1 is in the picture, it says system and security. So each of these has a task group. So on the system and security, you can expect to find things that are system related, like your power options, security related, like your firewall. It's a grouping of settings is what they call it. And if you look at point 2 there, point 2 is configuration applets. You can think of them as little shortcut links. It's absolutely not the only things you would find in that category. It's just the most commonly used things you would find in that category. Point 3 is the navigation breadcrumb, which is way there at the top. So the deeper you go into a folder, if you go into a folder which is inside a folder and inside another folder, you would eventually have a little breadcrumb there at the top. It's basically a trail as to how deep you've gone and what the path is to that specific file or that specific folder. That is a breadcrumb. Point 4, being the last one here, is the search box way at the top right hand side. Now we are currently in the control panel here, but if you go into the normal explorer, like if you go into a folder, you go into this PC, and you just go and explore your PC in general, you'll also find that you've got that little search block there at the top right hand side. At least the last time I checked, it was still there on Windows 10. You never know. Microsoft might remove it like in a moment's notice, like we said. And then guys, we've got the settings app. Now you'll see here it's called Windows Settings, but in most cases people refer to this as the Settings app. This is effectively the new control panel. This screenshot was taken quite some time ago and it changes very, very often. So yours is going to look like this more or less, but not quite exactly the same. You can find this by clicking on your start button in Windows 10, and you'll find there's like a little gear icon there, and that's normally the settings. So if you hover your mouse over the little gear icon, it's normally at the bottom left, right above the start button after clicking on start. That one says settings. If you click on it, you're going to find this little menu here. Very much the same as the control panel. Obviously, you can do the same and more. So they mentioned within Windows settings, you've got touchscreen enabled, and it's most but not all configuration settings are here. So yeah, it's very much the same as control panel in a nutshell, except this one you can go and use on a tablet, on a phone, because Windows 10 is also designed for tablets and phones. Alright, boys and girls, let's take a bit of a look at user accounts. So a user account, which is a logon ID used to access a Windows computer. Why do we have things like accounts? That is just one way for us to prove that we are indeed the owner to that machine or that account. Otherwise, anyone can just gain access to that device or that account of yours, and we don't want that. So it needs to be some sort of security or way of proving that you are indeed the owner of that device or that account, so that someone can see your private files and documents and all that. That's not something we want. So they mentioned a few bullet points here. Protection through authentication. So authentication, like we've just established, is proving your identity. You are proving that you are indeed the owner to that account or to that device. Now later on this course, you're going to hear them talking about multi-factor authentication, which is giving more than one form of proof that you are indeed the owner of that account or that device. Point 2 is profile contains settings and default document folders. So when you log on to your account contains a profile which has got unique settings, unique documents and all that. And this is something that's normally applicable if you are sharing a PC. So if you're sharing a PC and you're logging on to your account on that PC, you will find your documents and your settings. And if the other user logs on, same story. Point 3, administrator and standard user accounts. Now, if you're using a normal Windows 10 machine and you're the only user that uses that machine, the chances are you are most likely an administrator. Administrators generally have full access to that machine. They can install things, uninstall things, and do system changes. Whereas standard user normally has limited rights, limited privilege, or limited permissions, which means he or she cannot just go and do whatever they want. If they want to go and install a program, for argument's sake, it might pop up with a little prompt on the screen that says you need administrative privileges. And it might ask you for an administrator username and password just to prove that you are in fact an administrator or that you know someone that's allowed to install this. So yeah, that's something nice that you will probably end up using for like a kid. If you've got children that's sharing your machine, you might end up creating more than one account. You might make yourself an administrator and make standard accounts for your children so they can just go and install whatever they need to. There used to be a point in time when companies would go and make standard accounts for their users, and only the technical people would be administrators. So you as the techie would be administrator, and all the users would be standard users. And whenever they need to go and install something, they would have to email you first, call you first, either via phone or verbally down the hallway. They need to call you, and you would have to come to their station and type in your credentials first before they can actually change something system related or install something or uninstall something. It was very annoying, so we just don't do that anymore. Then you also get local and Microsoft accounts. I'm not exactly sure why they're mentioning it in that way, because normally we talk about local accounts and domain accounts. Local, like I said earlier, is when the machine has just been installed. It's probably on a work group. So if you are going to go and start a machine, you're probably only going to see like one, maybe two accounts on it. You're probably not even going to have to type in the username. Just click on an account. You type in the password, and that machine is going to check locally on that machine's tiny little database, which we call a SAM, S-A-M. It's going to check on the tiny little database if your password does indeed match that account on that little machine. An Active Directory account, which is not mentioned here, is when you're going to go and authenticate to a central point of authentication. This is normally for a domain joint machine in a company. Microsoft accounts, however, which are also referred to as a live account or an online account, is not an account that's locally stored in your machine. Your machine is not going to authenticate locally. It's not going to authenticate to a central point of authentication on premises. It's now going to go and authenticate to Microsoft, which is in the cloud. Some people say it's more secure. I don't fully agree with that, because if it was up to me, I can hack a local account, an Active Directory account, or a Microsoft account, all the same. There's always a way to skin a cat. But in general, the perception is cloud accounts are harder to break into. Alright guys, and then we have UAC, which stands for User Account Control. Now this nifty little feature was released on Windows Vista or Vista, depending on how you want to pronounce that. So this was towards the end of 2008, beginning of 2009 when that operating system was released. And I'm going to be honest, when that came out, I did not like it at all. And pretty much anyone and everyone I knew did not like this in 2008 and 2009. What happened back then is absolutely everything you would do on your operating system would ask you, are you sure you want to run this app? Are you sure you want to open that program? Everything would ask you that. It was so annoying. And not only would it do that, the whole screen would black out. You can see here in this little picture of mine, this is obviously not Windows Vista or Vista. You can still see it looks like Windows 7. No, I'm lying, that looks like Windows 10. You can still see the Windows desktop background in the background there. But with Vista or Vista, it would just go completely black. You would see nothing in the background besides that prompt that asks you, are you sure? Are you sure? So majority of us just completely turned it off. And when Windows 7 was released in 2009 in October, I had hopes that it might be better, but I wasn't sure if they would have completely fixed it. And thank God for all of us, they actually ended up fixing it. So now at least it doesn't ask you for absolutely everything. It only asks you if you're going to go and do some sort of important system change. If you're about to install something or run something that's very important, it's going to ask you, hey, whoa, are you sure you actually want to install that program? So this prevents malware, from automatically installing things in your PC or automatically running things on behalf of you on your PC. So if some piece of virus or malware is pretending to be you and is trying to install something on your behalf, yeah, it's not going to get very far because that UAC is going to stop it in its tracks. Alright everyone, and then we have administrative tools. Now this list that we have here, these are the ones that CompTIA has mentioned, but in reality it's actually much more than what you guys see in this list right here. Each of these tools will be covered individually sooner or later at some point in this course. So they're not covered in this specific module, I will say hang tight, they will be covered at some point during the course. Now computer management, that's the one that we have a screenshot for here that's provided by CompTIA. Computer management, as you can see in the screenshot, actually just gives you access to some of the other tools which can be considered as administrative tools. You'll see there in a little picture they've got task scheduler, event viewer, shared folders, and so on and so forth. Event viewer, which ironically is one of the tools that's accessible via computer management, is a log keeping tool, for the lack of a better term. It helps you keep logs of everything and anything that happens on your machine. It's a free tool that's built into both the client operating systems as well as the server operating systems. So you don't have to go and worry, where am I going to go and download this tool? It's free, it's built in. Now, once you go and open that tool, which is something we are going to look deeper into at a little later point in this course, you'll find it might seem a little bit overwhelming at first glance, but actually in reality, it's a very simple tool that just allows you to keep logs of everything and anything that happens on your machine. So we as IT technicians quite often use that to go and do our troubleshooting. It doesn't solve your problem, but it at least points you in the right direction. So if you've got a program or something that's crashing repeatedly, you can just go check in Event Viewer what the error is. If you perhaps have a blue screen of death, BSOD, or it's also known as a stop error or a memory dump, whenever you experience one of those, they normally flash so darn quickly on the screen you don't even have time to take a screenshot or to memorize the contents or read the contents for that matter. You can just go to Event Viewer afterwards and just go and view what the error actually was about. Now, if you look at the list, we also have Resource Monitor. That's a very nifty tool to go and use. So if you're going to go and find yourself going into Task Manager to go and check how much RAM you're utilizing, how much CPU, and so on and so forth, whenever you see something suspicious, you're probably going to want to go and investigate. And one of the tools we use is a built-in tool called Resource Monitor. Now, pretty much all of these tools are built into your Windows, both on the client side and the server side. They're all free, all built in. Resource Monitor is just one of them. It's one of my personal favorites. So it still shows you the same four main counters you would see in your task manager. You're still going to be able to see your CPU, your memory, your disks, and your network. Performance monitor, that is something I don't really like using much, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's not a bad tool. At the end of the day, it is still a free tool. It allows you to monitor just about anything on your computer. So if we, for example, want to go and monitor our RAM usage, you have so many things you can go and choose about the RAM that you can actually go and monitor. It's not a matter of let's just go and monitor the RAM usage. No, there's a very long list of things you can actually go and monitor. We call these counters, those things that you want to go and monitor. So more on that later once we actually get to the performance monitor topic. Then you have reliability monitor, also something both available on the client side and the server side. It's not something I find myself using a lot on the client side, and you 10 to 1 also would not. This is something that's exceptionally useful on the server side. The reliability monitor just shows you over a course of time if you have encountered any errors, any bugs or issues on that computer. On the client side, it's not useful, or at least not that useful, because you or the user is normally facing the screen. If there was an error or a problem of some kind, you would have seen it or the user would have seen it. So if you saw it, you're aware of it. If the user saw it, they're damn well going to go and complain about it, because people love complaining about things that don't work on their computers. That's the first thing they'll do. So the point is, you would be aware of that problem. On the server side, you most likely will not be aware of a problem, because servers generally are unmanned. A server is supposed to be running there on its own, completely unmanned, completely automatic, hunky-dory. So if there's a problem there, you are probably not going to know about it. So if you are going to go to that server, let's say once a week, and just go and maybe do yourself a favor and open reliability monitor, you might be made aware of an issue on that server that you might otherwise not have known about. Once again, more on that later. Services is something you guys are going to be dealing with a lot. There's many ways you can go and access services, and that actually applies to a lot of these other components as well. Majority of these items, as well as other ones that's not even listed on this list, they can all be accessed via 10 or 20 different ways, most likely. Services is just one of them. And then the last one on the list there is disk management. So disk management obviously allows you to go and manage your hard drives and virtual hard drives and all that on your computer environment. So let's take a look at our next topic, which is Windows disk management. Believe it or not, that actually is the next topic here. We're not going to go into too much depth right now. Now we're just going to cover the surface here, so to speak, about disk management. And later on in one of the other modules, we're going to go even deeper into disk management. We'll discuss things like hard drives and the different kinds of RAID you get and all of that. So with regards to disk management, as I've said before, it's built both into the client side as well as the server side. There are third-party tools available that you can go and use that also allows you to go and manage your disks. Some of them are better than Windows' disk management. Some of them are worse. But at the end of the day, you don't have to go and download those tools if you already have the disk management. If it meets your needs, well, then go and use it. As you can see there in the picture, on the top side of the picture, they show you the different kinds of drives you've got. Now the top one, which is highlighted, is the C drive. You will always have your C drive, which is your main hard drive where you've got your Windows operating system installed. The other ones could potentially be a floppy disk drive if you are lucky enough to have one. Those are pretty much extinct. Or it could be a DVD optical drive or something of that nature. So based on my experience, you're probably not going to even see a DVD optical drive nowadays. It's just going to be one hard drive or 2 or 3 hard drives, which are effectively your secondary drives. If you look a little bit down there in that picture, you'll find you've got disk 0, disk 1, disk 2, and so on and so forth. Disk 0 is normally your first physical hard drive, being your C drive. There you might find it's always partitioned into 2 or 3 partitions. In other words, subdivided. When you partition a hard drive, you're just subdividing that space. Now, C drive will always be partitioned into at least 2 or 3 partitions, one of which is system reserved. That is inaccessible to you as the user. Now, with your secondary hard drives, any extra additional hard drives you physically go and add to this machine, they will be listed as disk 1, disk 2, and so on and so forth. They generally only have one partition unless you yourself as the user or some other IT administrator has gone and splitted that hard drive into different partitions. If you go and add a new hard drive to your PC, whether it be a virtual hard drive or a physical hard drive, it's normally seen as an unformatted hard drive or unallocated, unless it was already formatted before you actually plugged it into your PC. So if you go to your local computer store, you buy yourself a new hard drive and you plug it into your desktop PC, then you'd find that it does not actually pop up in your Windows. And it's because it has not been formatted and initialized yet. You need to go and format it yet. So when you format a hard drive, you can imagine yourself as drawing parking lines in a parking lot. The cars by default don't know where to go and park in a parking lot until someone goes and paints some parking lines in the parking lot. Otherwise, it's just going to be chaos. Same applies with a hard drive. When you format, you giving it a structure. So you need to go and format it with FAT32 or NTFS or REFS. When you format a hard drive, you can imagine yourself painting some lines in the parking lot, and now the cars will know where to go and park themselves, just like your data will know where to go and park themselves on the hard drive. You're giving it some structure. So as soon as you formatted and initialized that hard drive, you'll find that it's actually going to pop up in your Explorer. You're going to find that now you've got a secondary or a third drive, the hard drive is actually popping up. You'll see in the picture that some of those hard drives are actually listed as black and it says unallocated. That is a hard drive that has not been formatted yet. It's not going to pop up in your Windows yet. It will only appear in your BIOS and in your disk management. Until you format that hard drive, that's the only thing that you're going to see. Alright everyone, and then let's take a look at our power options. Now this is the picture that I've been provided with from CompTIA, but realistically that's actually not what you're going to see when you go into your power options. First of all, I think this picture was taken on Windows 7, and nowadays the average Joe is using Windows 10. Although there's not much of a difference between Windows 10 and Windows 7's power options, they look very much the same. Now what you're going to see on the average computer, is three power options, not the ones we see in the picture there. One is going to say balanced, which is recommended. That is actually in the picture. Then there's going to be one that says power saver, and then there's going to be one that says high performance. Now what balance does is, if your PC needs more power, let's say you're starting up a game, you're starting up a virtual machine in your computer, anything that's very resource intensive, your computer would automatically use more power as needed. And whenever your PC does not need it, let's say your PC is just busy idling there, or you only have like a Word, spreadsheet open on your computer, then it's going to reduce power as needed. So that is balanced, and that's the recommended one, and that actually, quite frankly, is the default one. If you're going to go and choose high performance, your PC will constantly run in a high performance state, even if it's just idling, which means it's consuming a lot more power than it normally would go and do. So if you're staying in a country where power is an issue, or where power is very expensive, in other words electricity, then you might want to consider using a balanced power plan or a power saving or energy saving power plan. So then it might be a concern for you. Although these days computers don't use as much power as they used in the past, so it's not really a concern if you're running at a constant high power state. If you're going to go and use power saver, the only people I've actually seen use that is if they're very concerned with their power bill, and like I said, this doesn't really make a difference in your power bill these days, or if you're running a laptop. So that option is sometimes only available on laptops, and if you're running a laptop which is not plugged into a power outlet, it's obviously running on a battery power, then you might very well want to go and use power saver to reduce the power usage. The more power you send to a device, the better the performance. Also, the more heat it gives and the quicker the battery drains. So if it's something like a laptop, if you want high performance, it's going to go and consume that battery in, let's say, 15 minutes or 30 minutes perhaps. Where if you leave the laptop in power saver mode, it could easily last you 3 hours, 8 hours even, you don't know. So yeah, that's generally the idea with power saver, is just to stretch out your battery life. You will, however, notice that if you put your laptop in power saver, or even your desktop in power saver, you're going to find that your PC is very slow and very laggy and just, quite frankly, non-responsive. It's almost like it's just lagging, like you've got a virus on it or something. That is because you're sending less power to it. Less power means less performance. Just something to keep in mind, guys. And then we have our famous tool called the Device Manager. Now, you can pretty much be damn well guaranteed that this is going to be an exam. There's going to be more than one question about this in the exam, and some of them might even be exhibit questions in the exam. An exhibit question is when they give you a question in the exam, and towards the end of the question, they'll say something along the lines of, please refer to the exhibit. And normally towards the bottom, in the middle of the exam, there's a button that actually says exhibit. It's labeled as exhibit. And when you click on that, it opens a screenshot of something, which in this case is going to be of Device Manager. And in Device Manager, they want you to look at something, and only by looking at the picture or the screenshot would you be able to answer that question. Because by default, all of those answers they provide normally look legit. So what do we use Device Manager for, just in general? Device Manager is used to show you all your hardware devices that's installed in your computer. Now, just something extra I want to mention, we are going to go into more depth of Device Manager later on in one of the other modules. So today is more of a hit and run kind of situation of some of these topics. That is what Module 1 is about, basically. So you can see all the hardware devices installed in your computer. And if you were to have seen maybe a yellow exclamation mark or a little white circle, a little black arrow pointing downwards, that normally is an indication of a problem. It either means you have no driver installed or the incorrect driver installed. That's what the yellow exclamation mark means. And if you see the little arrow pointing downwards on the device, that means that particular device has been disabled. Now, if you go into Device Manager, you have the ability to go and update the driver or just quite frankly install a driver for the first time on any device. So a good example might be a graphics card. If you bought yourself a brand stinking new gaming graphics card, you might want to go and install the driver for it. Now, sure, Windows 10 does install most drivers automatically these days because it's got a very big, large repository of drivers built into the operating system. But those drivers are not always the latest, it's not always the best, and it doesn't give you all the special cool features that comes with your graphics card. So what you're going to want to go and do is you're going to want to install the manufacturer driver that comes with your card. So if you've got an NVIDIA card, you're going to go to NVIDIA's website. If you've got a Radeon card, you're going to go to Radeon, and so on and so forth. You're going to download the latest drivers for your specific card, your brand, your vendor, your model, and all that. And when it comes to installing it, sometimes you're lucky. You can just double click on a setup file and it'll automatically install what you need. But there are times you're going to have to go into Device Manager. You're going to have to right click on that device, being your graphics card. I think it's listed as display adapter or something in Device Manager. You're going to have to click on an update driver, and there you're just going to follow the prompts and update your driver. You can also go and remove a driver or uninstall a driver there. And you can also go and disable devices, enable devices, uninstall devices, and just quite frankly, troubleshoot devices from Device Manager. So that's a little bit about Device Manager in a nutshell, guys. More on that later in one of the modules once we actually get to this physically. So once we actually get to these topics, whether it be Device Manager, Disk Manager, or whatever, all of them I'm going to be covering with you guys practically, which means I'm going to actually open Device Manager. I'm actually going to go into Device Manager, and I'm actually going to show you guys how to go and install a driver, remove a driver, disable a device, enable a device, all of that. And one of the reasons I want to practically show it to you guys is just to help reinforce this knowledge to you guys, because they will ask it in the exam. So if you've seen it practically, I think it's just going to stick so much more today. All right, my friends, then we have what we call system information. So there's multiple ways you can go and access this. This is something that we IT technicians like to use quite often to just view what specs a user's computer has. Because quite often, if you're going to go and call the user and say, hey, sir, hey, ma'am, what operating system are you running? What is the specs of your PC? They will normally have no clue what you're talking about. So what we go and do is we'll tell the user to go and type in MS32 or MSInfo32, or we'll go and do it ourselves. So you can do this via multiple places. If you go to the little search block at the bottom left of Windows 10, you can go and type it there, MSInfo32, one word, or you can go and type it into the run. You can go type it into command prompt. You can go type it in a lot of places. It's going to effectively bring up the window we see in front of us right now. It will show you all kinds of information about this person's computer. Could be yours, could be the user's computer. It'll show you the operating system, how much RAM they've got, what CPU they've got, how many hard drives they've got, do they have a sound card, if so, what model, anything and everything pretty much about the computer you can see here under system information. Very, very useful information tab. Then we have what we call DirectX Diagnostic Tool. That's the full name. Most of us are actually not familiar with the full name. We just call it Diagnog or something like that. So generally, as you can see, it's about DirectX. It shows you your DirectX information. It shows you stuff about your graphics card and your sound cards, although for the most part, we just use it for graphics cards nowadays. You can see in this picture they took, this looks like it was an internal graphics card, so it's something that's built into a motherboard. So 10 to 1, this PC is not used for gaming. It's just an office PC, or used for office purposes for the most part. It's definitely not used for gaming because you can see clearly it doesn't even have a graphics card. Otherwise, it would be saying something along the lines of NVIDIA, Radeon, Gigabyte, something like that. That we'll see a well-known graphics card there with the make and the model and all that. So you can also see by the display memory there. If you look at the display memory there, that's very little. The average gaming graphics card does not have that little memory. They obviously have way more than that. Alright everyone, so that pretty much concludes it for module 1 for today. I do want to mention though that not all the modules are going to be the same length, video wise. Some of them might be an hour long, some might be 30 minutes, some might be 2 hours. It depends on the module. I don't get to decide that. I go according to what's in the module and I train it. So yeah, don't judge a book by its cover, as the saying normally goes. So I'm gonna go and train it as what was intended in that module. So if it happens to take 2 hours, then so be it. Which is why I'm just gonna reinforce again on using the timestamps. So if you're someone that already knows a lot of this stuff and you're looking for a specific topic, keep in mind I've got timestamps in the video descriptions for your convenience. If you already watched some of my videos and you just want to come back and revise on a certain topic, once again, use the timestamps. I've put it there for your convenience, so feel free to go and make use of it. If you guys have any questions about any topics that was discussed in this specific module, you're more than welcome to drop those questions down below in the comments box, and I will gladly get back to your questions and see if I can help you guys out. Guys, I put a lot of effort into these videos, so yeah, please smash that like button. It does help improve my channel if you guys smash the like button. Even though this video is an hour long, trust me, it takes way more than just an hour to make these videos. It sometimes takes 2-3 days to get one of these videos out, especially if you calculate the editing and all of that in as well. If you want to know when the next module comes out, please subscribe to the channel, otherwise you're not going to know when the next module actually gets released. So it should take about 2-3 days on average to release the next module. Sometimes it might take 5 days. It depends on what is in that module, like I said. Some of them are longer than other ones. Alright guys, so with all of that nonsense out of the way, I think I'm going to love you and leave you, and I will see you in module 2. Bye guys.
If you love me, let me know. If you don't, then let me